Welcome to Soul of the Story, Chapter 2, Book 1. I am here with an incredible author, someone who is a New York Times bestselling author and is known in the universe of Star Trek for writing a multitude of Star Trek books, but also other IPs. Marvel, working for 24. The illustrious, the awesome Mr. Dayton Ward. Dayton, is really good to have you on today.
What's going on, my friend? God, thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is a conversation that I've wanted to have with you for a while, actually. And I was telling you a little bit about that already. I want to start at the beginning of your story, Dayton. So can you talk a little bit about what was the spark that started you onto the path of writing, or made you want to become a writer? You know, when did that happen? At what age did that happen?
I mean, I know I wrote a little bit of stories when I was in high school, you know, that kind of thing, but it didn't really start to take hold until I was, I don't know, my mid-20s. Somewhere in there. I was working as a software developer, and I was still in the service at the time. And I basically started playing around kind of as a creative outlet, you know, and you write and jot down ideas in journals, in those the notebooks you get at the store for $1, you know, the composition books, and the little green log books that we had laying around everywhere.
Those military books, right? Those little
green log books.
Right,
yeah.
right.
So, I think I wrote my first story probably in the early 90s, you know, that kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
I actually started one and finished it somewhere in that neighborhood. And of course, looking at it now, it is absolutely horrible. It's absolutely bad. It's just like, I've burned all the copies. I've buried all the pieces. There will never be it. You'll never see the light of day.
Well, go ahead.
And then, yeah. So, and then around that same time, I was volunteering, not volunteering. I was serving as a moderator in the Star Trek Club on America Online.
Oh, wow.
I was like overseeing message boards and hosting trivia on Friday and Saturdays and things like that. And we had this group of us that all worked in different areas of the club. And for whatever reason, I started making up stories with everybody in that group as characters. So it was completely exaggerated. It was like, you know, different versions of them, but obviously,
right.
And I was just doing it for the laugh. I was doing it to get them to laugh.
Right.
And at that time, I'm reading all the Star Trek books, and I'm reading other books. I'm a huge reader. I've always been a huge reader, and I'm moderating the boards for Star Trek fiction and comics and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I'm paying attention, and, you know, here's John Ordover, the editor at Pocket Books, and he's introduced himself to the different message boards, and he's talking around, and all of a sudden he announces that they're going to do this short story contest. You know, the company that's been doing the novels for almost 30 years at this point is going to do a short story contest for people who've never published before. And I'd done some Star Trek fiction for fun, but I'd never considered entering it or sending it to an editor the idea of me writing a Star Trek novel just had
it's just crazy.
It's just reality, right?
Right, absolutely.
I'm reading them all. I'm reading them all.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So a friend of mine, one of the other people on the club there, she basically dared me to enter a story. Oh wow! So that's what I did, and I was as shocked as anybody when they announced mine as one of the winners of that first contest. And then I started submitting stories to like Asimov and Analog and Asimov's, and Science Fiction Age was still a magazine back in those days. And of course, I'm getting rejected because I'm a new writer who doesn't know what they're doing yet. Right. And so I kept plugging. I'm starting to see some improvement in my editorial feedback. Like, you know, this has potential, but not really what we're looking for, that kind of thing. And then the next contest comes along for Star Trek and the Strange New Worlds contest. So I enter a story in that, and they bought it.
That's right.
And then they did it for the third year. And then that's when John, you know, called me and said, okay, I'm going to buy your third one of these. You can't enter the contest anymore because now you're a, quote, professional writer, unquote. And how would you like to write a Star Trek novel for me?
How
And
did that feel?
that was in the what, winter of 1999, I think, somewhere.
Yeah. How did
So
that
yeah,
feel?
stupefying, because I had no, I wasn't aiming for that. I wasn't like, that was not even on the radar. This is
Right.
something that, that real writers do, and I'm over here playing around in this short story contest, and I'm having my fun and getting paid, but I no illusions of being a writer, a novelist. And of course, I'd never written anything longer than a short story in my life, so of course I said yes, I'll take that gig.
Right. Right.
As if you're a freelancer, that's always the answer. Yes, I'll take the gig. And
Really quick. That was the first advice you ever gave me when we met in 2005. You were like, any gig you get, just say yes. So
figure it out later. Just say yes. I mean, not every gig, but
of course,
I say no on occasion now, but back in those days, it was fun. So that was 25 years ago that happened. And I've been writing Star Trek novels pretty much ever since.
Wow.
Some of them on my own, some of them I'm collaborating with Kevin Dmore, my writing partner. So
really great, brother.
I don't know. When people ask me, I still don't believe that I'm still doing this after all this time.
Well, I think we're all thankful that you're doing it, because your work speaks for itself. It's some phenomenal work, and that's a crazy story, but that's a phenomenal story, and it speaks to your writing. It speaks to your craft. I want to back it up for a second, and because it was a Star Trek story. So what was it? I'm sure you've been asked this before, but what was it about Star Trek that inspired you, or can you actually remember your first like Star Trek memory? What is your first Star Trek memory?
I don't know that I can pin down to one specific memory, but I mean, it's been there my entire life that I can recall. Like the earliest things I can recall, Star Trek was a part of it. I mean, I would come home from school and they ran the reruns after school in the afternoon, like 4 o'clock or whatever. And that hour, that rerun was the lone exception that my mother had for homework before TV rule. I was allowed to watch that hour of Star Trek. And, this is back in the days when, they had the models and the action figures. And so I built all the models and I played with the action figures and we ran around outside and we played Star Trek the way you play Cowboys and Indians or something.
Right.
And,
of course.
So this is like the mid 70s. So it's, the original shows and reruns. I saw some of the animateds when they were first broadcast, but the only Star Trek really is the reruns, the occasional books that get published and the occasional comics that get published. So before the first movie and all that stuff. And so by the time the first movie came along, the hook was set for good.
You were just a lifer, right?
I'm a lifelong fan.
Right.
So that's where I've been ever since.
Right. Same here, man. A lot of our stories and how we started, I started in Strange New Worlds also, so that's just amazing. When you wrote that first one, you were already out of the military by that point. Is that right? Or were you still in?
Yeah, I've been out for a couple of years at that point.
Okay. So I find this fascinating about you. So let me ask you, first of all, I'd like to know, how long were you in the military for?
11 years.
11 years. Wow.
I went in right out of high school.
Wow. Okay. So you were in for 11 years and you went to the Marines. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you went into the Marines and you come out. How has that experience impacted you as a writer? And I can imagine you're going to say there's going to be some level of organization and discipline, and I would like to hear about that. But also, has it impacted what you write? Has it impacted the stories you tell? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Oh, I think it's obvious. Yeah, I mean that background, those experiences definitely inform a lot of my writing. I'm drawn to those kinds of stories.
Sure.
I like to read them and I like to write them. It's like when I write a Star Trek story, I tend to be drawn to the authority figure. A lot of times, not every time, but like if they ask me to do a Next Generation story, chances are Picard's going to be the guy I focus on the most,
right.
Or Kirk or whatever. But and then I've written original science fiction that's got a military bent to it, and I'd like to think that the background helps inform the writing and maybe lend a bit of authenticity to the writing.
Right.
Not the big things, not the battles and the tactics and that kind of thing, but just like everyday things, like the culture, the way people interact and live together and work together, and just the little things that actual vets or people on activity will get, because they're like, I've been there, man.
Right,
I can feel that in my knees, I can feel that in my back, I can feel it in my waterlogged socks.
11 years.
So that's what I go for. But yeah, there's the other side of it is, yes, it helps with discipline and organization and approach to problem solving and just tenacity, I hope.
Wasn't your first independent novel that you did outside of Star Trek? Wasn't it a military science fiction book?
It was. It was called The Last World War,
The
and it was
Last World War, right?
it was contemporary, like it's set in the modern day,
Right.
and it's basically about a group of Marine reservists who are the first ones to encounter an alien invasion. And a lot of the
That's pretty
background in
exciting.
that book is influenced by where I was working and living at that point in time, which is Kansas City, and I was stationed in Kansas City as my last tour. And we're not reservists, but we're also not like your frontline, you know, infantry unit or anything. We're a bunch of, we're a bunch of office workers.
Right.
And then once a year they send us down to a National Guard base so that we can pretend to be, actual Marines for a couple of weeks. We fire our rifles and we run around and we set up ambushes and we do all the fun things, and then we go back to being office, toads. I was a computer person.
Right. Right.
So the idea was, every one of these alien invasion movies always seems to feature the elite, the best that we have to offer in terms of military people. And so what if a bunch of reservists who, don't even do this full time were our first response to an alien invasion? So, right away I'm taking off all the boxes of things I don't want to do. And it was fun. I mean, that was also through Simon and Schuster pocketbooks, and it was John Ordover who had me write that book for him.
That's fantastic. So here you are, and it sounds like, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you had no specific intention on becoming a writer professionally, right? And you just did this, like you said, on a dare, and then it just started to like snowball. I mean, you wrote the one story, the second, the third, and then you're kind of like off to the races. Is that kind of what you would say in some
More or
respects?
less. Fits and starts. I mean, it was like
Right.
we did this. I did the first couple of short stories, and then I got the novel contract. And right around the time I was finishing the novel, I had been friends with Kevin Dmore for a couple of years at that point, and he's a journalist. At that point, he was working as a journalist. He was also writing for the Communicator, the Star Trek magazine, and we ended up collaborating on a couple of ebook novellas that were Star Trek. Right after I finished the novel, he and I went to work on a couple of these novellas. So that started our collaboration, fiction.
Which is still going on now.
The bromance is still hot, buddy. And so, and there's times when we've written novels together, and then I sometimes would sprinkle in one that I wrote on my own, or then I would be. And in the last couple of years, we've kind of figured out, we'd rather find other projects to write rather than spending 5 months writing a novel. It's like, well, let's find some of these things that burn hotter and faster, and we can move on to different things and keep it fresh, So, because he's still working full time as a writer for Hallmark, and I'm laughingly trying to make a go as a full time freelancer. It has its ups and its downs.
I'm sure it does. Well, when we were talking about that, but let me ask you, since we're talking about Kevin, and I've met Kevin. Kevin's a great guy and he's a fantastic writer. What's it like doing a collaboration? I've done a few. I've only had like one or two that were successful. But like you said, the bromance between you and Kevin Dmore is going on what, 20 plus years now? Is that right?
Years, yeah. We've been friends for 20. We've been friends for almost dating back to when I sold that first story, because that's how we met.
Wow.
He was writing for the Communicator, and he was given the assignment to interview the first batch of Strange New Worlds winners.
Wow.
And so he sent all his interviews out via email with his standard question block, and then he wrote me an email saying, "Hey, I'm looking, and it looks like we're about 45 minutes apart." He was at the time living in a small town in Kansas called Paola.
Mm-hmm.
I was living in Kansas City, Missouri. And she said, "Hey, where do you work?" And I said, "Well, I actually work on the Kansas side. I work, I was working in the suburb over there at a tech center." And because I was still doing my software bit at that point.
Right.
He said, "Well, how about we just meet for a beer after work, and I'll interview you that way." And I'm like, "Okay," And then so we met after work, and I think the interview took about 20 minutes, but we ended up hanging out for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then we started hanging out on the weekends and going to conventions together and doing, whatever we do, because we have a lot of the same interests.
Sure.
And, our wives were very thrilled that we each had a new playmate to take on and go do stuff that they didn't want to do, like go to conventions, go to that kind of thing. And then we started collaborating. First, we wrote an article for the Communicator together, and then we ended up doing the fiction. So, and that's how that started. That was what, 2000, 2001.
Right. So 23, 24 years ago, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing, And how many pieces of work have you two? How many novels have you two written together? Do you
Oh
know
man, I'd have to
offhand?
look, but I think it's like 10 or 12, I think,
10 or
novels that we've
12,
written.
yeah.
And
And
then there's other
you,
stuff we've written. So yeah.
right. And you're well over 20, 30 novels on your own at this point. Is that
I
right?
think it's like 20 or 25 novels on
Right.
my own. But
On your own.
I mean, I know it sounds stupid to not know that, but I really don't.
No, it's understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, at a certain point, you're writing it and you're putting all your effort into the work, and then you're not necessarily counting. I get it. I definitely.
And there's others. I mean, it's not that I'm not keeping score. It's just like,
Right.
yeah, that sounds right. Pretty close. I know I'm in the ballpark. And then yeah, the stuff that we work on, even when we're not officially collaborating, like it's not the two of us contracted to write something. We're generally helping each other out on some solo project anyway. We're usually the sounding board or the idea helper, shaper, that kind of thing. It's like
Right. Right.
even when so it's I mean he's basically unofficially like a ghost collaborator on a lot of the stuff that I do solo,
That's
and vice
amazing.
versa. Yeah.
So okay, so we're talking 1998, roundabouts there you started. It's now what, 27 years later, 26 years later, and I wanted to ask you, as a storyteller and storytelling, um, how has your understanding of storytelling and writing evolved from that guy that wrote that first Star Trek short story? Because you've not only worked in the realm of Star Trek, but you've worked with Marvel. You've done stuff. You did the 24 novel. You've done. I mean, you've done so much work as a storyteller now. How has your understanding of storytelling changed or evolved?
Well, first of all, it's adorable that you think I have any grasp of that whatsoever.
Well, I know you do.
I mean, that's the other. I guess that's another thing that we're saying is I never took any kind of creative writing classes.
Right.
I mean, I did. I mean, I didn't set out to do that. I have taken creative writing classes. Like I take a night class, about story structure or literature or something like that. Just to, because in the beginning I thought that's what you needed to do. It's like I need to go to these classes. I need to go to these writing seminars. I need to do all these other things. And for a lot of people, that's what helps them get over the hump.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it was just irritating the hell out of me because I'm like, I just want to go home and write about Captain Kirk blowing up Klingons or whatever. And but as far as my grasp of story structure, whatever that might mean, I read a lot. I've read a lot. I've read a lot of science fiction novels. I've read a lot of mysteries. I've read a lot of historical fiction. So I like to think I have some grasp of a plot structure.
Sure.
And Star Trek is wonderful in that it's one of those franchises that balances character and plot very well. Sometimes they go one or the other, but I mean, for the most part, it's fairly balanced.
Right.
It's also, most of the stories tend to be morality plays. And so those are the things you're looking for in a Star Trek story. I don't think there's any one kind of Star Trek story, but I think most of them, if you break it all down and peel back the skin and everything, is they have a lot of the same components in them. They might be they might be rearranged as far as the order and the precedence, but I mean they're all there. And so I just kind of work my way through it, and I learned from other writers, and I bounce ideas off other writers. Like I bounced ideas off you. I bounced ideas.
Yeah, and I've bounced ideas
all
off
the other folks in the stable. And those bar meetings in Shorely were not just BSing sessions. We are plotting and
we're actually
we're actually doing things in that bar to earn that tax deduction that we're going to claim at the end of the year. And so it's just I mean, and everybody's process is different. So it's like I don't sit down with like a skeleton and put the meat on the bones in a formal way. It's just it's a lot of it is instinctive and intuitive based on what I like to see in a story and what I think is effective in the stories I've written before, and then just kind of try to teach myself something new once in a while. Be nice to try to learn a new trick.
Absolutely. Challenge yourself, right?
All you other folks that do this stuff around me are you all are great for that, because like, well, I want to do one of those. Derek really knocked it out of the park with that book. I should probably try to do something like that. Or Dave, once again, Dave Mack brought me to tears again. I should probably try to, but I'm not Dave. I can't do that. So it's just I don't know. It's just it's not a set process. It's an ongoing evolution of figuring this out as you go.
Yeah, it's a day by day
It's a day by day. Hell, I
page
mean,
by page, word by word challenge.
I can spend all day working on a chapter, and then I come back down from dinner and I go back through what I worked on. I'm like, well, that's a hunk of crap, and I delete it and I start again.
I've done that.
Because
I've
I've done that. So
done. I think we're there. Is there I know a lot of the times when I write, I try to sometimes convey some kind of message or meaning in my stories. Is there anything that you try and do specifically, or do you just tailor to what you're writing at the time, or is it something like you want to like infuse in everything that you write?
I don't have an agenda
Right.
generally when I sit down to write a story. I mean, I don't have like this is what I want to say. When I'm tasked with writing a particular story, I figure out what I want the plot lines to be, and then as I go, the themes and the things that are interesting as far as, well, this is what I could say if
Hmm.
I do X, Y, and Z. I could comment on this obliquely, or or stealthily, like current event wise, uh, and go from there. Like I'm writing the Next Generation book that I did that came out this year, and I'm halfway through it before I start to see the unconscious parallels I've been making to current events. I'm like, well,
Right.
that
That
wasn't
happens.
it
Right.
wasn't my intention to make a statement on those current events. It's happening because I'm taking in that information in one ear and then trying to write, and I'm unconsciously infusing that into the narrative.
That
And
makes a lot of sense.
but the idea is I don't set out to beat anybody over the head with an agenda
Right.
or a message. It's just like, Star Trek is great for communicating a message or an ideal. Um,
Absolutely.
and if it's done correctly, you don't feel like you've been beaten over the head
You
with it.
never know. Right. You never know.
You're
You
not,
just
you're not supposed to
entertain.
see it coming. You're
Right. You're
supposed to.
not.
It's
Right.
just supposed to. You get to the end of it, and you're like, "Wow, that made a lot of sense." If
Exactly.
you do your job right.
Right. And I think you do that really, really well.
I appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. Let me ask you. So, over time, have you adapted your process? I know, like when I first started, I would just write and would like write a few lines here and there, not give anything, and I didn't even care about it. And now my process has changed where I commit more time and more effort, and I outline. What does your like day look like as a writer? I should also note that your day is probably very complicated or occupied because you're also um, I don't even know exactly what the title is, but you're overseeing in some respects a lot of the material that Paramount and CBS is putting out for Star Trek and giving input on it. Is that correct as well?
It'd be more accurate to say I'm giving input. I'm
Okay.
providing feedback, or I'm
Okay.
providing direction depending on the situation. My official title, apparently, because I saw it on an org chart, they finally gave me a title. It's called publishing consultant.
Oh, that's great.
So basically, what I do is I help the Paramount franchise team that is devoted to Star Trek, all things Star Trek, with various publishing endeavors that are going on, either from Simon and Schuster or the comic books or reference books or the role playing game or the magazine, anything with a narrative. I have the potential to see it at some point.
Great.
And usually I provide feedback largely with respect to making sure the Star Trek is Star Trekking. It's like the canon and the continuity are being observed, and the brand is being properly represented, and it's consistent with what we've seen on the shows. And I'm also looking, when I read the scripts from the different productions that are coming out, I look for opportunities that could be exploited as a tie-in. Like, oh, that dangling plot thread would make a cool comic book arc, or
Mm,
somebody might take that and make a novel out of it.
right.
So I make these notes and I offer them back to the people who are writing these things. So yeah, that definitely does take up a part of my day. Not all the time, but
Hmm.
most days I'm like, I just got done reading a script, and making notes on it for Secret Hideout. But in the back of my brain, I'm thinking, okay, that's a storyline that might be worth following up if they don't follow up on it by the end of the season, that kind of thing. Not me personally. I mean, I'll offer it to whomever. Like I'll tell IDW, hey, this is something that's coming, and they're going to leave it on the table.
Right.
Feel free, to think
Right.
about that.
That's pretty cool.
It's fun. I mean, I have a hard time explaining to grown-ups what exactly I do for a living. Because they look at me and they're like, what? So, do you write for the shows? That's usually the question I get asked the most. I'm like, no, I don't get to write for the shows.
I remember once on Facebook you posted a meme of Doctor Strange when he's looking at all these different permutations, and you were like, "This is like what I'm. If you want to explain what I'm doing, this is like what I'm doing." And in some respects, I think that's actually kind of accurate because you are looking at everything and trying to mesh it all. And I'm sure, I know you did it with me with the Cisco book. We were talking about like continuity and does this happen at this time? And like for Tyler Scott, was that like possible or not possible? Those kind of things. That's a lot for you to do on top of being an author with your own responsibilities as an author.
Sometimes it's hard to separate it. It's like, well, okay, I've just spent a long day reading everybody else's creative visions, and now I got to go and eat dinner and then come back and work on my own novel for a couple of hours.
Right.
And I've been doing Star Trek all day. It's like, at least when I was a software developer and I was working full time as a developer, when I came home, I at least had a few hours to I could unplug from that world and plug into to fiction and do something completely different. Now the worlds are a little more blended. So I have to be a little more on guard to make sure that I don't get caught up in all of it and forget where the heck I'm at one from day to the next.
So that's kind of like my next question. I was thinking about this before. I was thinking about like balance. I know sometimes as artists, we have this tunnel vision, and you have all this going on, and you have a family, you're doing all this other stuff. What do you do to unwind from these worlds that you're involved in? What do you do? How do you get that balance and unwind from all that, and then be able to come back to it? Because I know a lot of people think it's a dream job, but when you're focused on anything for a certain amount of time, there's a kind of it's not that it's not a joy, but you still have to unwind from it. So what do you do to kind of like unwind?
Yeah, I unplug from it. I go for a walk. I mean, I love taking long walks. So, I'll walk 5-6 miles and I'll listen to an audiobook that is pointedly not a Star Trek story.
Right, of course.
I'll go, we have a boat that we can take out on the lake in our neighborhood and do that. I can get away from that. Or we go to the movies, or we go shopping. I go hang out with Kevin and we go do something.
Oh, that's great.
I got my kids that are keeping me busy running around. Right. So there's enough to do that distracts me. And it doesn't take long. I just need to get away from my desk for a couple of hours.
Right.
Get outside, get some vitamin D, get some sun.
Right. Get some sun.
Go cut the grass or something like that. Right. And usually when I'm cutting the grass or walking, that's when I usually unwind something I'm working on. Like if I'm having trouble with a story and it's just knotted up in my head, doing one of those types of activities where I can kind of just let my brain unwind a little bit will help me work through whatever I'm working on at the time.
Wasn't that famous scholar Ferris Bueller said, the world moves pretty fast. So you got to get out there.
My wife will tell you, she's watched me as like I'll be outside in the yard pushing the lawnmower back and forth doing my thing, and I'll stop mid stride, kind of stare off for a second, and turn and run for the garage because there's a notebook and a pen laying there where I can write something down, or I'll take out my phone and jot in the notepad app or something. Because like, okay, now I've worked it out, and then I'm really excited to get done with the yard work and get cleaned up so I can go back to work.
Right. I think we all need that downtime, right?
Think so.
Yeah.
And then I drink a lot. No, I don't drink a lot.
No.
Not as much as I used to. Like I said, now that my world is all of it. It seems like it's all Star Trek all the time, and it's really not. There are days when it feels like it, but it's not. And again, it's Star Trek. It's fun.
Right, it's Star Trek.
Like it's not like this is it's not a huge sentence of death posed upon me. It is a dream job in a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's thankless, and sometimes it's crazy, and you're like, I can't believe we're having a conversation about what Cardassian feet look like, or something like. And that's an honest to God discussion that got had. There's days when I just sit back and go, I can't believe we spent 30 minutes talking about that. Right. And then back to work.
Well, somebody has to have that conversation about Cardassian feet. So,
it'll please you to know that it was in the context of lower decks. So,
okay. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Because they would just email us out of the blue. What do you think a Cardassian foot looks like? And I'm like, I don't know. Mike McMahon has the same kind of feet. I don't know. We've never seen a bare foot, on a Cardassian.
Right.
I don't know what I'm anxious to see what it's going to look like when they show it. Who knows what they came up with?
So let me ask you, you've done a lot of work in Star Trek, and you're primarily, I think it's fair to say, you're known for that. Yes. But what was your first intellectual property outside of Star Trek, and what did that feel like, starting to move away from something that you're very comfortable in and into something else, And I'm imagining you still do that. So what does that feel like when you're moving from one thing that you're comfortable and secure with to like different kind of waters? What is that like? What was that
You
like?
mean like another tie-in, a different tie-in?
Another tie-in. I mean, because I know you've done stuff with Marvel. You've done, like I said, the
So
24 piece. You know, you've done a lot of different things. What's that feel like for you when you're transitioning over to something else? You know, because I mean, I'm sure a lot of it's the same. I've done something where a lot of it's the same, but then it's different because you're working with a whole different
it's the
group of
same in
people.
the sense that you're serving two sets of masters. You're
Right.
serving your editor and your publisher, and then you're serving whoever is in charge of those sorts of consumer products for that IP or
Right.
that studio or that. So like the first tie-in project that Kevin and I did, it was Kevin and I working together on one. It was the first time we did something that was outside Star Trek. We did a novel based on the original 4400.
I read that one.
And the reason we did that was because Simon and Schuster Pocketbooks got the license to do
Right.
four novels, and the editor was Margaret Clark, and she was one of the Star Trek editors. There was a time when Star Trek had like 4 in-house editors.
Right.
So she asked me and Kevin if we were interested in doing the 4400, if we'd seen the show, and we're like, I've been watching the show since the first episode, and I love it. So it was our first time doing something together that was not Star Trek. However, and luckily the same licensing people. It wasn't the same people, like the Star Trek people weren't overseeing the 4400 books at Paramount or CBS, but it was the same relationship. Like, okay, we're known quantities, so a lot of the approvals and the trust factor is already established. Like, they know us, they know what we can do. So that familiarity was nice. The first time I worked outside of that comfort zone was I did a novel based on 24, the television series. And that's a completely different dynamic. Working with Fox versus working with CBS or Paramount is a completely different animal. And not unpleasant, just different.
Just different, right.
And then, so, I mean, it was fun to do that. I mean, I think working on a particular IP for a long time and being familiar with how the process works helped out. Right. It's like, not new to this. We understand that there's going to be requests from on high, and the studio is going to take a longer look at it. And with the show, not actually in production, but they were actually in the process, the early days of ramping up not the reboot, but the spinoff version of 24.
Of 24, right.
And so it's still an active property, and one that they're very, very protective of. So it's like, once we got through the hump of, okay, these guys are not just fanboys who like to write, they actually understand the show and are, committed to doing it correctly. Once you get over that initial not distrust, but just skepticism, then it's smooth sailing. And that's the way it's been on every IP project I've worked on.
Yeah. And I think that skepticism is founded because they want to make sure that the person they're working with knows what they're doing.
You want to know it's not just about, a lot of people are like, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, I want to write a Star Trek novel. I'm like, that's the least thing that they're worried
about. Right.
It's like, are you a good storyteller? Are you a good writer? Can you hit your deadlines? Can you work and play well with other writers?
That's right.
And the deadlines are what really drive a lot of tie-ins, are just insane compared to, well, you're not going to get 18 months to write this book. You're going to get 4.
Right. And, and it has to be done.
And it has to be done.
You have to have an outline.
So it's definitely a hard nut to crack. Right. And I hate it when somebody asks me with, I don't hate it. I don't have a problem when somebody asks me to do it, but I hate having to crush their dream or tell them the truth and try to let them down easy about, it's just not going to work that way. That's not how this job works.
Yeah.
It's hard to break in. I know that, which is, every time an opportunity comes along to try to nudge that door open a little wider so that people can come in, we try to find it. But it's definitely it's driven by the top. It's the top down. It's like, the editors who edit these things, the production cycles are so insane, unforgiving. They have no choice but to work with writers that they're familiar with and they know can hit their deadlines, and they know can work and interact with the other writers. Of like, we're all working on a book of a 5-book miniseries. Can we work and play well with each other?
Right.
And it's just like, that's not something that you throw. I wouldn't want to throw a new writer into that mix.
Right. No, it's a machine that has to keep running, and you have to be on top of it to keep it running.
So I would love to be able to do that, but it's just like, that would be like one of the most unfair things to do to a new writer.
Absolutely.
It's just, so they look for writers with track records. They look for writers who've managed to publish something else,
Right.
IP or not, and then they go in. It's not the best way to launch a career,
No.
And then, of course they look at me and they go, well, you did it. I'm like, dude, I rode every chariot, every unicorn drawn chariot over the rainbow, and didn't even know I was doing that. And don't use me as an example, because I'm the weirdest example ever. Don't use me as any kind of guide stick or yardstick, because I suck at that.
Right. No, I understand. I mean, I didn't expect a lot of the same things. I didn't expect to start the way I did, and for things to go the way it did. I just did it because a friend of mine told me, "Hey, this is a story, and you should enter
Yeah.
it." So it's the same. It's the same thing. Now, let me ask you though, without getting into any specifics, when it comes to, we've all had, as writers, we've all had challenges. So can you talk about a moment maybe in your career when you've felt challenged with something, or if you had a challenge and how you overcame that as an author? Because we all have those moments.
In what context? Because
In any context you want to talk about, whether it was deadlines or a project, or just a
I have
hard nut to crack.
I had a book that Kevin and I were working on. It was the one that we did for the 50th anniversary for Star Trek.
Okay.
It was the third of the trilogy, and I was working on it, and my mother was sick at the time, and she died while I was in the midst of trying to finalize the book.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
And I was down in Florida. Her health had been failing. I got called down. I had to go down and deal with all of that, and help my sister deal with all of that.
Right.
And at the same time, I'm like, I've got a short story for another publisher that's due.
Right.
I got this working on, and and they were very understanding. Don't get me wrong. My editors and my publishers were very understanding, but at the same time, there's a production that's scheduled that has to be hit.
Right.
They gave me every ounce of grace they could afford, and probably a little more,
right.
and let me get through that. And it was hard because I felt like I was letting everybody down.
Yeah.
And it was just like, once I got my head back on straight and powered through, it was fine. But at the time, it felt like it was never going to end. Like, I just hate this book. I hate everything about it. I hate everybody associated with it. I hate Star Trek. I hate everything. And, once I got out of my own head and got back on task, it was like, okay,
right.
I got a job to do, and I'm supposed to be, I'm an alleged professional, so I got to get on with this. And once I got done, that was fine. But man, that was rough. That was a rough couple of months.
No, I can understand. I've had similar situations, so I can definitely understand, it's not optimal, but you have to get it done. You have to get it done.
You just gotta put your head down and stay on mission. It's like, it's not fun, but
right.
At the same time, it's like I got Kevin, again, this is a partnership with Kevin, and he was shouldering as much of the load as he could do.
That's great.
While also working full time and dealing with his own issues. And it's just like, okay, we'll figure this out. But man, if I can get through this, then I think we'll be okay going forward.
Right. That's amazing, man. So what excites you these days? What is it that gets you going on the story, whether it's for Trek or something that may be of a short story that you're working on, for an anthology or something? What are the kind of things that gets Dayton, going like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I could do something like that.
It's people ask me, the age-old interview question is, where do you get your ideas?
That's what I think I would ask.
And it's easy to blow that off with a smart-ass remark, and I've done that a couple times in good-natured fun. I don't mean to blow off the person asking the question.
Right.
But the truth is, I get ideas from every place. I get them from the news. I get them from people around me. I can just sit in the airport terminal and I see a person doing something, and I'm like, that would be a lot more funny if they were being chased by zombies while that was going on. Right. And then you start to write the story in your head, right? Or you just start to tap it into your phone. I could be reading something in a magazine, and something, one line in that article sticks out. And I'm just like, I could turn a story into that idea right there. And I might jot it down, or circle it, or tear the page out of the magazine and stick it on my desk or whatever. Ideas are everywhere. I mean, and that's one of the things that a lot of people seem to get hung up on is, I've got this great idea for a story. That's great. But what then? What's next? What do you do with that? You have to tease it out. You got to figure out if it actually has any legs.
Right.
Can you flesh it out to a full-length novel? Is it only a short story? What is it?
It's not the idea, it's the
And or
implementation.
you get through all that and you realize, well, this was a dumb idea. But hopefully you learn something from it in the process. Yeah, it's just it's if you're a writer, you're always looking around and coming up
You're
with
always
ideas,
looking
whether
around
you are
from
consciously aware of it or not.
right from
You
everywhere.
wake up the next morning, you're like, well, that was a hell of a dream. I should probably write that down or something. It's just,
Do you have anything that you would talk to if you were able to talk to the younger Dayton uh, in '98, and you would tell him now from 2024 to do? And I'm not talking about necessarily life, but you can answer that however you want. But I'm thinking primarily as a writer. Is there anything you would tell that Dayton in regards to writing or storytelling?
I don't, it's hard to say because I can't think like, the one obvious answer would be like, quit your job earlier. Maybe that's, and not because it would make me a better writer, but I think I would have been, there was a point where I was doing all this with my day job. I was a software developer. So I'm
Right,
working like
right.
65 hours a week
That's a lot
and
of
then
work.
trying to come home and write a book. And I'm staying up until 2, 3 in the morning and then getting up at 7 to go to work,
Right,
and doing that day after day after day. I don't have weekends. I don't have holidays.
right,
And this is before kids. And then once the kids came along, I'm still doing all of that and trying to be a father
right, right,
and pick up my hope, my portion, at least my portion of the load
right.
for
Of
everything
course.
that entails. And I was just burnt out. And I was, as my wife will tell you, I was miserable to live with.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened though was, I'm dealing with my day job and all of the stresses that come with that. And then I come home and I write and I'm in a better place. And then like she came with me the first time to a convention, like I mean, it was a Shorely convention,
Hmm.
and she watched me in that environment, where I'm hanging out with other writers and I'm
Right.
engaging fans and people who wanted me to sign their book and all. And she's like, "You are so cool compared to the idiot I live with. This version of you is so much more fun.
Where has he been? Right.
Where has he been? You used to be like this. What the hell happened to you?" And so it just over time, it started to seed itself like, I don't want to be a developer anymore. I want to be a writer. It took a
Right.
long time to get there.
Yeah.
And, but because at the time I'm thinking, okay, I had my shot to do something really cool and fun, but now I'm a father and we've got a mortgage and I've got to think about college and all these
Right.
things.
Of
And
course, it's
so
not.
my day is over. Now it's nose to the grindstone and you keep the corporate job to pay the bills and collect the benefits. Right. And so I was just resigned to that. And then about 10 years ago, actually, I was notified that we were all going to get laid off like at the beginning of 2014, we were told our account was closing in September
Oh
and
wow.
we could either find another job somewhere in the company or take a severance package.
Right.
And we just bought a house. Like we had just bought a new house. My kids were
Wow.
just getting into school. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to start over with a resume and the interviews and
Right.
all that stuff. And I'm 47 at this point, and I'm
Right.
like,
Right.
I have to start over at the bottom of somebody else's cubicle farm.
Right.
And I'm just like, and I'm sitting there updating my resume and I'm just looking at the wall like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I do not want to be a software developer. I used to love it. There was a time when I would have imagined myself doing it until I died.
Really?
And then
Wow.
the navigating the layoffs and surviving the layoffs and the downsizing and the salary cuts and everything. And then finally they called I get my number, and I was just, part of me was just ready to chuck it. And it was my wife who said, why don't you just try writing full time for a while? And we'll see.
Wow.
And
That's amazing. She said that.
yeah, she said that. She literally
That's
said,
amazing.
I like you more when you're the writer guy. And I want to live with that guy. I don't want to live with the software guy
Right.
anymore.
Right.
And I'm like, I can't blame you for that. How the hell did you not kick me out of the house before now? And so I started doing that. I said, let's just take it for a couple of years and see how it goes. And
Right.
that was 10 years ago.
Wow, man.
So,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
I'll never go back to it. I'll go kicking and screaming back to a cubicle.
Right, right, of course, of course. Wow. That's, I think, as an artist, we start to get to those places where you want to create and you want to do your thing, but then there's the real world that kicks in,
Yeah.
and we have to in some respects obey the rules and regulations of the real world so that we can do the art, so that we can do the other thing, But it's amazing that you're being to be able to have that idea and notion, and your wife spoke to you to say that let go of that thing, let go of that, and just jump in completely to this. So
If it hadn't been for her, I probably wouldn't have done it. I would have just,
just kept going,
I
right?
mean, not right away. I would have done the
Right.
interview circuit. I would have tried to find a different job. I likely would have landed some job, but it would not have been what I had lost.
Right.
And I would not have been happy, but I would at least in my brain be doing what's expected of me. It's like, I've got to provide for my
Absolutely.
family. I've got
Roles
to,
and responsibility. Right.
this is a hobby that just happens to pay a little money once in a while.
Right.
But also I think in hindsight, having those 10 years to build a network of editors and publishers and other writers who could vouch for me at other publishing houses allowed me to hit the ground a little softer than I might otherwise have done because when I got done, I basically told me in March of 2014 that we were getting laid off, January, March, somewhere there. Right. I had all that time to contact, I talked to like people at Pocketbooks and I would say, you always said you'd give me more work if I was more available. Guess what? And so it just started like that. I lined up enough work for basically the next 2 years.
Oh man.
So, with that and a severance package, I was a soft landing. Right. And as a freelancer, how this works. You're always looking
for the next
gig or two ahead, right?
Absolutely.
You might be working on a book now, but you're negotiating for the next book or the book after that.
That's right.
And so it just became a game of hopscotch from project to project, and that's again. If I had tried to do that 10 years previously, I don't think I'd have been successful because I wasn't as known a known quantity like I was at that point. Right. So that helped. So it happened to work. All I needed was the kick in the butt from my wife.
That's great.
That's a recurring theme, by the way.
I understand. But at the same time, you're also, while you're doing all this, you're also, as a writer, you're honing your craft. You're writing. You're consistently writing, so you're getting better. You're doing your thing. So let me ask you, how do you know? Of course, there's deadlines. But how do you know when you're ready to let go of something, right? When you're ready to let go of a project, because even if you've done the outline and you've applied everything you wanted to in the outline, and maybe other people are happy with it, but how do you know when you're ready to let go of something that you've done, that you've written?
That's a good question. I on some level, I don't know that we ever fully let go of anything we create.
Right.
We always feel like we could do something better, or as time passes, we're like, I could have done that better. I could have done this better. I don't know that I'm ever fully satisfied with anything that I've done. I've learned to be, more circumspect than that. It's like, this is the best thing that I could do with this project, with these guidelines in this amount of time.
Right.
And I can look in the mirror most of the time and go like, I gave it everything I could within those constraints. And that's not enough to make me happy. You know what I mean? I don't know.
No,
I'm never fully satisfied, but it's like, the editor comes back, good job. And I'm like, okay,
if you say so.
If you say so, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I don't think any writer worth a damn ever fully lets go, because they're always telling themselves, there's always a way to do it better. There's always a way to do it more concisely or stronger, or, whatever.
Right.
I cannot imagine ever saying that book I just wrote is perfect, the best thing I've ever done. I can't imagine even drawing breath long enough to say something so stupid.
No, I agree with you. I remember like about maybe 5-10 years ago, I came across my old Strange New Worlds, my first story, and I started editing it, and I'm like 10-15 minutes in, I'm like, what am I doing? This is, what am I doing? So, but it's because of that thing. It's because that we just can't let go. So
I've had to go back and look at something I've written previously because I was writing a follow-up or something that touches on it, or and I'd be like, God, I can't believe they published that. Crap. I would like to think every writer has that clutch moment, from time to time.
Sure.
Maybe except for Stephen King or Una McCormick. I think Una McCormick is perfect all the time.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's amazing.
She's perfect. But other than that, everybody else should be doing that. I think that keeps you humble.
It does.
I think there's a great deal to be said for humility in this line of work.
In this line of work, there is a lot to be said for that.
In a lot of line of work, but particularly when you're doing anything creative, I think you have to be able to weather reviews and opinions, and there's always going to be readers who absolutely loathe everything you've ever done, ever. You're never going to be their favorite writer. You're never going to be a good writer in their eyes. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
You know, if they take the time and or spend the money, they get their say, and they're entitled to their opinion. And I have nothing but respect for that. It's just the way it goes. You got to have a thick skin, you know, to survive as a freelance creator or just a creator in general. But particularly if you're doing it for money, you know, it's just, you gotta learn to just not obsess over that. And the other side of the coin is don't believe your hype.
Right.
Don't think you're the king of the hill because
you're probably not.
Reviews.
You're most likely
not. You know, it's like, it's all opinions are most, you know, except for the ones that are just toxic and looking to pick a fight. I think all opinions are valid.
Right.
It's just the way. Maybe I can learn something. Maybe I can learn something from a well-crafted critical review. You know, so
I know I have. Have you ever learned anything from a review that was maybe a little bit critical? I know I have. Yeah, because sometimes
I think so. I mean, I'd be like, I may not have liked the way they made the point, but they made a good point, and it's like, okay, that's something I'll file away for next time, hopefully, and I'll learn my lesson. I mean, I'd like to think I could learn from every experience.
Right. Hopefully that's the point. Do you read your review? I try. At first I started like with the Cisco book. I started reading reviews and I was like, oh, let me stop doing this because I don't go
out of my way to read reviews, but you can't avoid them. You know, it's like
they come in,
or somebody writes you an email, or you know, you're on a message board or one of the groups on social media or something, and you're going to see something.
Right.
You know, and I try not to react one way or the other. I mean, if somebody reaches out directly to me, I thank them for the review.
Yeah, I've been thankful.
But I don't go looking for reviews. I don't go looking for you know, the groups to talk about. Like whenever there's a book club and they're going to do Dayton's book, you know, I'm like I stay away from those things. You know, I'm like, everybody's entitled, you know, to be able to air their opinion, good or bad or whatever, without feeling like they have to pull their punch because the author is in the room.
Right,
you know?
Of course,
as long as it's not like petty and vindictive and you know assassinate your character or whatever. I mean, if it's about the story, swing away. You know?
Right, absolutely.
I'm a big boy. I'll take it.
Absolutely. So. Well, we got about 10 minutes left. So I want to ask you a few ending questions. I'm curious to know. I don't think we've ever discussed this. I'm curious to know. Is there a film or a book or a writer for that fact that inspires you or that you go to for inspiration or just something that you enjoy and have watched in those times when you're like, you know, I just need something that's going to like uplift me or get me going?
I am a huge fan of Richard Matheson.
Oh, gosh,
he was a very early inspiration. I Am Legend might be one of my very favorite books.
It's
I think
a phenomenal story.
I've lost count of how many times I've read that story or listened to that story. There are passages I can quote, you know, if I'm up for it, but you know, it was one of those stories that stuck with me. I read it at just that golden age. Like I was 12 or 13 years old when I read it.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't a YA story. It definitely wasn't intended necessarily for a 12-year-old. I read it and it just stuck with me. And then another book that it's always stuck with me I read it as a school assignment. It's called One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. And it's a very thin book, and it's about a prisoner who's in the Russian gulag in the 50s. And basically that's the story. It's his story from sunup to when he wakes up to when he goes to bed. Wow. And it's basically just the unremarkable, soulless existence of a Soviet prisoner.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and all the things that you do to survive and get
in a gulag, right?
And in a gulag. And I don't know why. It's just, I guess I just read it at the right age, but it's one of those stories that stuck with me. And I've had a copy of those two books and many others, you know, since the first time I encountered them. And then I read stuff just for fun. Like, I mean, I read a lot of thriller fiction. So I'm, you know, Tom Clancy and Jack Carr and you know, Elmore Leonard. I love I'm you know, I'm an Elmore Leonard fan. I'm a Craig Johnson fan. If you've ever watched the Longmire TV series, you know, I go back and I read that. It's just, I read a lot of that kind of stuff, just for fun.
Right.
You know? I don't read as much science fiction as I used to when I was a kid, but I still, every once in a while, something pops up that I like, you know, when Andy Weir came out with The Martian, I was like, okay, that's
a really good book. Yeah.
You know, and I read a lot of military history and a lot of history. So I think that probably informs my writing. I listen to a lot of audiobooks when I walk. So it's just, you know, my brain is like having 1,400 browser windows open at the same time on any given day.
But that's how you stay informed, and I think all of
Yeah.
that seeps in. So so that when you're writing and you're adding to your stories, you're pulling from all these different places. That's what I do. It's what we all.
I have some weird dreams. I know that.
Do you have a favorite film or a film that inspires you?
If I had to pick one, like just one.
Yeah, if you had to pick one. That's tough.
God, it's a toss-up, man. It's hard.
That's tough. Yeah, that's tough.
I love older movies, so I'm probably going to go with something like either The Day the Earth Stood Still, or The Great Escape, or Stalag 17, or something like that.
The Great Escape is a very good film.
It's a very excellently structured story,
right? And, a lot of character development.
And the way they do it is like, they introduce the main characters within the first 10 minutes of the film, but you don't feel like you're being info dumped.
Right.
So by the time they actually get on with what they're there for, you're familiar with not just who they are, but what they bring to the table, because of the way they're subtly introduced. And I don't know, I can watch that movie no matter when I catch it. Like if I catch it 10 minutes before it's over, I'll watch it.
I'll watch it, right. It's not like it's like a 3 hour. I haven't seen it.
3 hour movie.
It's a 3 hour movie, right? Yeah. Steve McQueen, you can't go wrong.
It's color, so my wife will put up with it. But I mean, like, there's days where she'll come in and I'll have a black and white movie and the kids will roll their eyes like, oh my God, black and white movies. I'm like, you guys are you're culturally deficient. Come sit down.
Well, we've talked about Orson Welles and so I mean, there's great stuff with that. So yeah, film noir and
Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, I love a good
Hitchcock movie. Right. So okay. Cool. Well, we're almost done. I will say I'm thinking I have this in my head. There's this Trek episode. It's the one with Garth. I think it's Whom Gods Destroy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like Captain Garth, and Kirk says to Garth that you were the model, you were the template, and you were the one that we all look to. And in a lot of ways, I think that of you, man. I think you are the template. You're the one that is doing a lot of fantastic work in the Star Trek universe and doing it with poise and grace. So I want to thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I understand that my journey is not a typical writer's journey, and I have been very fortunate and even privileged to do what I do. Yeah. So I try to take it very. I remind myself of that frequently.
Yeah. Same here.
It's like this is an odd journey that I've taken, and I'm very fortunate to do it. And not a lot of people get to do what I do, so I try to do it the best I can every time I step up to the plate.
Yeah.
Try to take it seriously. I take the fandom seriously. I mean, the fandom, Star Trek fandom, so devoted.
It's like no other.
And it's like, as I tell, you can't phone your way through one of these things. You can't phone it in. You can't.
You can't. They will tell you. They will come up to you.
And they will rightly crucify you when you do it wrong.
Rightly
and
crucify you. That's right.
No, it's just, I mean, like I said, they devote their time, their money, their energy to it. It's like, yeah, they deserve a full effort when you step up.
That's it.
So
that's it. Dayton, thank you. It's been a wonderful hour. I appreciate the conversation. We've had a lot of fun. Thank you for giving us a little peer into the soul of your story. And it's just been a lot of fun talking to you, man. I hope to do it again soon.
It's always fun talking to you, man. We gotta do this when we're not on the clock.
Yeah. That's we definitely will. Thank you so much.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Take care.